Catherine talked about the absolute importance of support, and support in many ways, through friendships, through families, etc. And for our next presenter, we're going to have someone who identifies as a carer. And carer is one of those funny words, isn't it? You know, we get called carers sometimes, but we're mum, we're dad, we're sister, brother. We're all of those things. But let me share with you a little bit about Karen. Karen Bailey, everyone. She's been in a caring role for loved ones with borderline personality disorder for over 10 years. And she works part-time in a library. She's attended the carer support groups, courses and workshops, and she wants to share with you some of her own life experiences, and as well as that, some of the difficulties from the context of a caring role working within the mental health system. And she's also passionate. You don't get to own that one on your own, okay? She's also passionate about actively lobbying politicians for better statewide services for BPD services in South Australia. So, ladies and gentlemen, from a carer's perspective, can we welcome Karen Bailey?
Hello, can you hear me okay? No overheads for me, and I've got notes. So that was so inspiring listening to Catherine. I heard her speak the other night, and I really love that she's so honest and willing to share, because it's really nice to hear about it from somebody else's perspective, because we all tend to get caught up in our own. So, hello everyone, I'm Karen, and I care for 2 people who live with borderline personality disorder. Also work part-time. I love art, caravanning, and I've got an interest in the Australian boutique beer brewing industry. And I mention this because I actually do have a separate identity from my experience as a carer, but to be honest, I often don't get around to doing many of the things that I love doing and that I'm passionate about. I get caught up in this whirlwind of caring for someone with BPD. So I've thought really hard about when I want to talk to you about caring for someone with BPD. I want to tell you a little bit about our history and how far we've all come. I'm going to tell you, I share with you some of what I've learned, what I wish I didn't know about, and what I would love for people to know when they are on the team supporting my loved one. So some of you here today are fellow carers, some of you are clinicians, students and workers, and some of you are our loved ones. And we are all here. We are all with you on this experience. You matter. We see beyond the scars, the piercings. We see you handling life the best way you can today. We're discovering together, practicing the new ways of being and welcoming these new directions in treatments. So as a carer of someone who's unwell, I know it's important for me to take care of myself so I don't become unwell, but it has taken me a long time to work this out. I really value the support that I get to help me do this. I personally receive support from a few different carer groups here in Adelaide, and I have to say it's definitely saved my sanity. The Commonwealth Respite and Care Link Centre is a good place to start, and they link carers up with their local agency. So I'm offered practical support, respite, counselling, I attend courses. It really does make a difference to my ability to continue in this role as carer. And in addition to the government-funded agencies, particularly enjoy belonging to Sanctuary, a support group in Adelaide specifically for carers of people who live with BPD. We meet monthly. We learn new ways of supporting our loved ones, and it brings such relief being with people who we know actually really get our experience. So the loved one I want to talk to you about today is my daughter. I'm her mum, and it's strange to be given the title of carer, because of course I care for her. I love her. I want the best for her, but mostly I feel and act like a care coordinator. And I don't want to be that. I want to have a mother-daughter relationship. I found myself in this role many years ago in the absence of clinicians trained in supporting people with a BPD diagnosis. Thankfully, we're now on a wave of increased awareness given by your presence here today. It's fantastic. But back then, I didn't know how to support her, and I tried to learn and understand the condition as much as I could. So my daughter's 27 now, as of yesterday. She has gorgeous blue eyes that light up when she smiles. She's compassionate, she's clever with words, she's an amazing memory, and she's got a wicked sense of humour. Her body is covered in scars, cigarette burns. Her face is full of piercings. She weighs 110 kilos, a byproduct of medication. She struggles with addictive behaviours. She's pre-diabetic now. She has a raft of medications for back pain. These are some of the presentations of BPD. So I first learnt about BPD through a relationship. It wasn't explained to me by the diagnosing psychiatrist back then, so my hopes these days is that clinicians are better at explaining this condition to families. I chose to leave that relationship, and I soon discovered how intense abandonment issues can be for everybody involved. Some years later, I recognised the signs developing in my daughter when she was a teenager, but I was told then she's too young for a diagnosis. So this meant no treatment for her and no support for me. So I've seen many of those symptoms that are listed in the DSM-5, and I've had to deal with self-harm, psychotic events, suicide attempts, what being detained meant, drinking, drug addictions, self-medicating, overdosing, gambling, bulimia, violence, homelessness, detoxes and rehabs. It's involved confronting bikies, police, courts and shelters. I know it's just a list of words, but each of these has been a reality that my family has had to live through. Many were scary and they lasted a long time. And remember, I was drawn into this world that I didn't want to know anything about. But I'm not a worker in this field, and I needed to know about these things because I couldn't address the issues unless I knew what was going on in her world. Unfortunately, most of the time, I was alone, confused, trying to cope with something my GP or public health system seemed unwilling or unable to provide support for. I didn't know how a psychiatrist could help. I didn't know what a psychologist could teach. I'd never even heard of community mental health. I was worried because I couldn't understand why my child had become like this. I became depressed and eventually could not hold down my full-time job. I always feel on call, my health suffers, and I regularly see a counsellor. So I'll fill you in on some of our experience now. Of course, it's just a tiny little bit. And some of the services that I mentioned might be of interest to other carers and workers who support people with borderline traits. So there's been a long history of contact with mental health services now, initially as a 15-year-old through CAMS, Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services, and later as an adult presenting repeatedly by ambulance or as a walk-in to emergency departments at various hospitals. It seemed to me back then that the public mental health department was reluctant to take her on as a client, that her condition was seen as bad behaviour. She was formally diagnosed when she was 20, and her name had finally come up on a private psychiatrist's waiting list. Just learning the differences between the public and private system is so confusing. And this is where, as carers, we actually need upfront advice on how to navigate at the beginning, not at the end or in the middle. It's so hard. 4 years ago, after a serious incident where she was admitted to a public hospital, she was assessed by ACEs while she was there. Now they're called mental health triage. This is another really confusing thing. Why do you change the terms all the time? A file was opened for her. She was referred on to other agencies, which were drug and alcohol rehab, etc. And then her file was closed. I wish I knew how the system worked. I would not have felt so alone or frustrated. Imagine how people with a diagnosis feel. 2 years later, while in a public hospital for an operation on an abscess, she had crushed up some medication and injected it, and it had infected. She had to have an operation. I spoke with her first, let her know that I was going to ask the registrar to do another referral to mental health. So when that registrar came, talked about the self-harm aspect, she was open, she knew what I was doing because it was to get support. We were, after a long assessment, assigned a care coordinator, key worker. This is really fortunate and significant because I believe out of approximately 100 of our sanctuary members, only 3 of us, maybe even 2 I just heard, have got a care coordinator to support us. So several times since then, of course, they've tried to close her file. Luckily, we've got access to Partners in Recovery now through Medicare Local, now called Primary Healthcare Network, and they have been invaluable in keeping her in the system. Please do not let this initiative lose its funding. It seeks to address the gaps in the system issues. It's flexible, it's effective, and it's one of the best things that has happened to me as a carer in this confusing, ever-changing landscape. And who knows if BPD or carers are going to be considered eligible for the NDIS funding. We need PIR. So having a care coordinator is the gateway to their services. Finding out what their services are, of course, is another hard process. I found out it offers care to the DBT, free, psychiatrists. Cost is important because many carers, we don't have the time or energy, nor do the people with the illness. In SA, it also provides access to the psychosocial programs. That's activities and social interaction for her. It also provides access to the Community Rehabilitation Centres, or CRCs. You may have heard of Wandaka, Elpida, or the Trevor Parry Centre. These are residential facilities where people with mental illness can develop living skills such as routine cooking, cleaning, hygiene, managing their own medication and their finances. Because that's another thing that I do for her. I manage her finances with drug and alcohol issues. That never doesn't go well. After 10 years of wild living, my daughter's difficulty with living skills was very apparent. She ran away when she was about 16. She's lived in squats in the city. She's lived under a tree in the Botanic Gardens. She's lived with various boyfriends, sometimes with me, but you can imagine that's not good for our relationship. It does not go well. She's also tried drug rehabs. She's tried supported residential facilities, SRFs. These are places like aged care homes where residents with intellectual, physical or enduring mental health pay most of their pension, if they're on disability support pension, for meals, rooms, cleaning. It was actually too much care for her and it really wasn't suitable. A lot of it is intellectual and physical health, not really suitable for mental health. The workers also don't have the training. Challenging times. Her care coordinator at the time advised my daughter to move out. She wasn't happy there, but the care coordinator really wanted to work directly with my daughter and not with me, and suggested my daughter do this without my support. So my daughter had gone out and found a boarding house without me even knowing, signed a lease, and I found out the next day. And I was really cross at the time because I feel my care coordinator should have prepared me for this. I also manage her finances. She can't even sign a lease. The boarding house was terrible. What happened, because it was a shared boarding house, unsavoury. They were all men, drugs, alcohol. She couldn't look after herself. And, you know, I needed to know what was doing, but because it was a shared environment, that care coordinator couldn't actually go inside. That care coordinator never even got to see how she was managing. That's one of the issues in the system too, I guess, just the communication with us as carers. But having the care coordinator at that time meant we could put in a referral to the Community Rehabilitation Centre. It took a while, but she did eventually get there. But the environment in there is more, the training seems to be more around the bipolar and the schizophrenia. Updated training, perhaps, would be really helpful for the staff there. She felt treated very differently to the other people there. Her placement was tenuous due to her adherence to a necessarily strict drug and alcohol policy. So it's confusing for her because her drug and alcohol worker has a harm minimisation approach and the CRC has a zero tolerance. In June, she was evicted from that service to homelessness, I might add. She was actually in hospital after an overdose when she was evicted. And a few weeks later, she went on the streets. They knew that she decided to live with a prior resident. She ended up in hospital a few weeks later with pneumonia. But that crisis has led to another opportunity. So as you know, many people with BPD use various ways to quell the mental and emotional turmoil. Self-harm is one way that they use to change their emotions. Drugs and alcohol are another. Studies have quoted that around 50% of people with mental illness self-medicate and have issues with substance abuse. That's 50%. In years, we've been on this merry-go-round between the mental health services, referring to drug and alcohol, and vice versa. And I still wonder why these two agencies are not more closely linked. The SA Government Department even has the name Mental Health and Substance Abuse Division. But in my experience, the workers in these two departments are often not aware of each other's services. They rarely communicate with each other around her care, much less communicate with me as a carer. So she's significantly reduced her drug and alcohol with DASA. Many years, she's reduced from injecting drugs and very serious drugs to now marijuana, alcohol and occasional pills. It's an ongoing issue, and it probably will be. There's the impulsivity, the wanting to quell the emotional pain. But it's not an uncommon response to want to replace one of these tools with another. So what happened was when she would go to a drug and alcohol rehab, she would self-harm, and she would get evicted from that because that wasn't acceptable behaviour. They would actually put her into hospital, and then she was not able to go back to the rehab. This happened numerous times in SA, detoxes and rehabs, and even I felt abandoned every time this happened. 7 years ago, we went into state so we could attend a youth rehab called Triple Care Farm outside of Wollongong. In South Australia, the teen rehab is Christian-based, and my daughter was goth at the time, so that was not going to work. So after self-harming there, she was discharged. I was back in Adelaide by that time. She was discharged to a private hospital in Sydney. Thank goodness I had just taken out private hospital insurance for her. So she spent 5 months there. In that clinic, they did actually deal with both mental health and drug and alcohol, but unfortunately the emphasis was on the medication. She gained 20 kilos on Seroquel while she was there. They served comfort food there. There was no requirement for her to get up and attend those DBT or meditation. Unbelievable, really. And as you'll hear from other presenters here today, thankfully the research is showing that psychotherapy rather than these types of medications is more effective in helping people gain lasting recovery. So the good news is she's given up all her hard drugs. She's mostly compliant with her medication. She's recently started chemotherapy. She's losing weight. She's actually seen a dietitian last week. And she still regularly attends her meetings with her drug and alcohol worker. And I'm happy to say that 6 weeks ago, she moved into private rent. With the support of a worker, she is slowly coming to terms with independence. And me too, because this is a journey for me too. I now have to relearn that I don't need to know everything, and I can, pass it on, because the whole goal of this is for her to gain independence, manage her life well. So she's got now what's called an IPRIS package, Individual Psychosocial Rehabilitation Support Service. Again, it's necessary to have a key worker to get a referral to this program, even to know that such a thing exists. The service is delivered by a non-government agency, and she gets near daily support for living skills. So this provides support for her, and therefore to me as a carer. She can now move forward with the work of developing her routines, focusing on stabilising her thoughts and emotions. I'm tentatively learning to stand back and to trust. It is such a hard concept that these programs will stay in place, that the worker that she's connected with can stay with her, even though she has crossed their paper line boundary by one suburb. That's all taken more than 10 years. What could have happened to help this earlier? So I'd really like to share some of what would have helped me as a carer, and if I keep talking, you'll keep me on time, Bob. So I feel my journey could have been a lot easier if I had support from specialists. And here are some of the things that would have been helpful. I've included some comments from members of Sanctuary. So this section of the talk might be helpful for some clinicians who also might benefit from the specialist training and support in treating their BPD, so their clients, with BPD. So as you listen to these comments, I invite the clinicians to consider what gets in the way of involving the carers when you're presenting. when you're treating someone with BPD? How can you let carers know what works best for you when we have information to communicate to you? What could be the benefits for your practice? Carers can be a key in helping loved ones, but we need to know how to do this so it supports the work that the clinicians are doing. If we're not informed or trained, our loved one may return home to us in the same environment, and we may actually contribute to the emotional stress that they're feeling. Fill me in on your treatment plans so I can work with you and not undo your good work. I like to think we're actually on the same team. Consider the network of people surrounding the person. Please explain to us about the illness and how your profession can help. We might not know what to expect from the therapy or how a loved one will react to your sessions. Explain how that mental health system works and how other services are available. Let us know about carer consultants based in hospitals. Teach us the difference between antidepressants, antipsychotics, anti-epileptics, and mood stabilisers. Let us know that drug companies have medical inquiry lines that we can phone for support. What I'd really like to see is clinicians developing stronger relationships with each other. In my experience, I've seen both clinicians prescribing, a new psychiatrist prescribing something that's already been tried. The psychiatrist as a GP is not communicating, and vice versa. And then there's the other therapists as well, psychologists and the workers. What I'd like to see is that after diagnosis by a specialist, and it might not be about the BPD, it might be something else, like the stomach issues or the dietitian issue or the pain medication. It seems safer and simpler to have ongoing scripts written by one clinician only, possibly the GP. This is what I have requested with my GP. He refers out. Those specialists refer back to the GP. So it's easier for my daughter to access the GP. It's also everything's in one central record. It prevents doctor shopping by my daughter, because she will do that. It makes packing the Websters so much easier for the chemist. And as carers, it's helpful to remind ourselves, I think, that we are actually consulting the professional, and we shouldn't feel bad about asking the professional to take this on. So I've learnt much from researching, but I still need to learn about dealing with the unpredictable things. That's a hallmark of it, isn't it? The emotional side, responding to the crises, knowing what to say, what not to say to my daughter. This is where I need support from clinicians as well. I need to be able to chat with you without feeling like I'm just trying to control the person that I'm caring for. I want to share what's happened so that you'll know whether she's splitting the truth. Maybe she's trying her darndest to get some more benzos out of you. I can let you know that she recently crushed up those Seroquel and that she had that operation for that infected abscess. She may just forget to tell you that. And this actually happened. She was sitting in his room and she proudly sat there and she told him she's been 2 years clean of injecting amphetamines, but she'd just come out of hospital. If you think it compromises the relationship with your patient, for us to communicate with you, perhaps I could write you a letter. I've sent faxes. Perhaps you could acknowledge that you've read it. That would be enough. It will be up to you what you do with that information. Most carers know you can't tell us stuff, but it really helps if we can get that communication going. We'll benefit, I think. If I'm in that consulting room with you, please continue to talk and have eye contact with her. I do not want to take over. I just want to prompt topics for her to be active in the appointment with you. So psychiatrists often advise that hospital admissions are not helpful for BPD patients. Often, though, they are actually seeking that for their own protection. My daughter often, she does not want to self-harm, and she goes there seeking help, but often the environment, it's so stressful, the frontline people aren't trained, but she just wants a buffer from what brought her there in the first place. It's also time out for me. I can tell you it's very, very exhausting. Indeed, she might just be seeking medication, but as you know, alprazolam is not the answer. It's better that they learn other ways of regulating their mood. One time she presented to ED and normally they do the whole thing, they clear your body first and then you get to see ACEs. I would really love that those two processes could happen at the same time. And one time she met a mental health clinician in hospital then, and all it actually took was a conversation with that worker, a very skilled worker, training, experience. It was wonderful. It was what she needed, not the tablet. So in finishing, I'd like to comment on what new direction I'd like to see for BPD. We've heard today it is a treatable condition, and I believe that a statewide BPD service is vital. Victoria's got Spectrum, New South Wales, you know, is Project Air, Western Australia is gearing up for the Haven, SA, we're lobbying for ours now. We need a centre where attitudes are compassionate and not judgmental. Clinicians, carers and loved ones need access to up-to-date specialist information and support. That can give us those pathways. It can offer multiple therapies too to support the psychiatric care, you know, like mentalisation, like chemotherapy, transference, steps. DBT is good and it suits some, but those groups, for people who've got high anxiety and for people who've got drug and alcohol issues, and, you know, if you don't turn up for a meeting, you're out. It's not the answer for everyone. Finding the one-on-one therapist that you have to do to even attend on challenge is really challenging on your Centrelink benefits, that gap. The 10 sessions on the Medicare health plan, it's great, but 10's nowhere near enough. We need to dispel the barriers to treatment. So a multidisciplinary team like this, or a centre, it would facilitate communication. It would enable us to address BPD as a team. So our loved ones, you and I, we would all get the support we need. And with support, we'll all be much stronger, and then we can continue with you on this experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen. Can I just get a sense of carers in the room, or people who care in some way? There's a few of us. What wouldn't you do for someone you love? Okay. Let me show you. This year, my daughter, who's the same age, Karen and I shared this, has attempted suicide many times. This is what I did for her. Got a tattoo on my arm of the Semicolon Project. Now, some of you may know what that means. You got one too, and more. Power to the carers. Thank you very much. And there was a quiet little bit of me that wanted a tattoo for myself as well, but